I'll say briefly what's there so that you have some idea what I'm talking about. There's little difference in tooth decay in 12-year-olds between fluoridated and non-fluoridated countries. We've already seen that here. Oh no, that's the CDC. This is the world data, so that is not very convincing. The largest study done in the US looked at 39,000 children, 84 communities. The difference was 0.6 of one tooth surface. That was the saving. Lifetime exposure in a fluoridated community versus a non-fluoridated was a saving of 0.6 of a tooth surface. And that was not even shown to be statistically significant. The most precise study in the United States by Warren actually measured how much fluoride in milligrams per day the kids were getting, estimated from toothpaste, water, and food. They could not find a relationship between tooth decay and the daily dose of fluoride. What they were looking for was the optimal level of fluoride that you needed to reduce tooth decay, and they couldn't find it. Their quote, "These findings suggest that achieving caries-free status may have relatively little to do with fluoride intake," which you can understand if the mechanism is topical. I won't go into that. There are better ways of fighting tooth decay. In Scotland, they started this program called the Child Smile Program, and in this program, the first school the kids go to, kindergarten, they are taught to brush their teeth. They are given healthy snacks in the kindergarten. They involve the parents in this. So as well as the school giving the healthy snacks, the parents learn to give their kids healthy snacks, vegetables, etc., etc., etc. Taught how to brush their teeth. They get inspected once a year. They all get inspected, and they get treatment if treatment is necessary. This has halved the cost of dental care for low-income families, and the results are fairly remarkable. The children of age 4 to 6 who without obvious dental decay has risen from 42% in 1996 to 67% in 2012. Now for 10 to 12-year-olds, it's gone from 53% in 2005 to 73% in 2013. This is remarkable. These are low-income families in places like Glasgow, and they are ahead of their schedule right now at 73%. And the costs, Glasgow researchers found that the scheme had reduced the cost of treating dental disease in 5-year-olds by more than half between 2001 and 2010. Now, I heard some good news this morning. Somebody's told me there's a program by your Department of Health here where they're taking out full-page advertisements and getting the information to schools, fighting the consumption of sugar, the sugary foods, obviously to fight obesity. Now, they're obviously getting some results with that. What we've got to persuade them, that's good, that's great that you're getting less sugar, but finish the job off and make sure they get less fluoride. Less sugar means less tooth decay, less obesity, less fluoride means higher IQs, we hope. And just one last thing on the IQs. The last children who need to have their IQ lowered are children from low-income families. Precisely the ones being targeted by water fluoridation. So that's ironic. You're targeting kids for special care, and they are the ones who are going to be most vulnerable for lowering of IQ and the consequences. Again, there's lots of things I wanted to tell you about what's happening around the world. I just mentioned a couple in our shot. One of them is that Israel, since I was here, Israel has banned fluoridation, stopped mandatory fluoridation, and completely banned fluoridation in Israel. That's a very precarious, it's a very precarious decision because the Minister of Health went out on a limb to do this. She did not get the support from her Department of Health, and she's since been forced to resign. So we're not sure how long that's going to last. Meanwhile, Ireland, which is the only country in Europe that has mandatory fluoridation, they are getting council after council after council. We've got a map, which will soon be on our webpage, showing the towns which have voted, in most cases unanimously, to to tell the central government to stop mandatory fluoridation in Ireland. And the towns already, if you know Ireland, Wexford, Galway, Cork, Dublin, South Dublin Council, where I think about half of Ireland's councils have voted to end mandatory fluoridation. That will send shockwaves when that happens, when the federal government, central government goes along with this. That's going to send shockwaves. So you've got a lot of things to look for. In Australia, nothing may be happening except cricket, but at least in Ireland things are happening, and in Washington, D.C., if we can get through the Vipers, we can end it at the central level. Meanwhile, we have to continue to educate one person at a time. One open mind at a time. People are very resistant to this. Go to our webpage, there's plenty of tools for you to use, our videotapes, our leaflets and so on. And one community at a time. And I think we're keeping a tally. 170 communities have stopped fluoridation since 2010. And a lot of those are in Queensland, where they lifted mandatory fluoridation in 2012. So there's a lot of good news. It's an uphill battle. I think we've had a massive betrayal of the public's trust from our health agencies and the bureaucrats working in those agencies, and the professional bodies have done us a huge disservice by just being so superficial in their science. And lastly, the mainstream media has been on this. They are not doing their homework. Investigative journalists seems to be dead. Most citizens now that we're in know far more about this than the editors of your newspapers and your journalists. I mean, it's just unbelievable, the ignorance of the media. And I have to put up with this. If you can imagine what it's like being a former professor of chemistry and having written a book on the subject, having challenged every leading proponent of fluoridation to debate this in public, and to read these editorials which claim that people opposed to fluoridation are anti-science. Come on, who's being anti-science here, and who is being pro-science? But I say we've got to keep it that way. You have to bite our tongues and keep doing it the right way. There are no shortcuts. There are no shortcuts. There's only one shortcut in this. If you don't want to look at the science, that's fine. We've got too many scientists in the world. We need a few more humanitarians. But if you don't want to do a lot of reading and a lot of science, then stick to one issue. The government has no right to put a medicine in the drinking water. The government has no right to force me to take a medicine against my will. It's a violation of my informed consent. If that's the only thing that you say in public, it's going to be worth it every time you say it. So it doesn't have to be a lot of work. Thank you so much.
Cognizant of time, but I think we're going to have enough time for about 5 or 6 questions to Paul. Obviously, if you make them questions as opposed to statements, that would be really appreciated before we wrap up. So do I have any questions for Paul? The gentleman in the blue here.
Dr. Connett, I didn't realise until the beginning of your talk that fluoride is added to salt in some countries,
yes,
rather than the drinking water.
Yes.
And I'd like to suggest that it may be more politically acceptable to add it to salt rather than drinking water if the politicians insist that it's going to be done. And then the salt can go in supermarkets where most other toxic foods already reside.
I think you're absolutely right, and if politicians want to discuss this amongst themselves, my problem is I don't want to give credibility to that idea because I do not think that swallowing fluoride has anything to do with lowering tooth decay. So you're basically supporting a myth by supporting this. But I agree with you, it's more rational. Far more rational. And there's a lot of Latin American countries and Caribbean countries that fluoridate their salt.
Another question, please.
Thanks. When I met with the health department people about fluoridation and the the fact that the United States Department of Health, where it was, said that fluoridated water should not be used for mixing baby formula.
Yeah.
They reckon that that's not relevant to our situation because the level of fluoride in our baby formula is much lower than that in the United States. Do you have any information?
Yeah. Well, first of all, this recommendation has nothing to do with the fluoride levels in baby formula. That was sorted out years ago. This recommendation is based on how much fluoride the bottle-fed infant is going to get from the fluoridated water. It's had nothing to do with the fluoride levels in baby formula. No.
Any other questions?
Good question, thank you.
Putting into consideration that water fluoridation has been implemented by some of the biggest hierarchies, according to the definition of governments in the world, do you think this has any link in relation to dumbing down the society, regaining authority, and maintaining some sort of power against the people?
I don't look for ulterior motives here. I believe that at least the people, the run-of-the-mill, the dentists, the dental professions and so on, are true believers in this. They really believe it works. Their only crime is that they just don't take the trouble to read the science, which shows that even their own studies shows that it's not very effective. And I think that by ascribing evil motives to this, you run the risk of upsetting them, and that's not the way you change people's minds, is to insult them. Especially if you throw in Hitler used it in the concentration camps, which makes me cringe every time I hear that. First of all, the historical evidence for that is practically non-existent. It's just one person that's supposed to have found this story. We even tried to track this down using the Wiesenthal Foundation that tracks down Nazi criminals. They couldn't find any information that Hitler had done this. You've got to remember that the Nazis were not bashful about talking about their human experiments, making people into lampshades and things. So they weren't embarrassed. So I think if they had found this, they would have been proud of it and they would have told us. So, and as far as limiting the world's population, which is another conspiracy theory out there, if that was the motive, it's been wildly unsuccessful. Wildly unsuccessful. So I don't think it would be an incredibly clumsy way of, I think, trying to control the population. But it does make it a little suspicious when you look at some of the countries, like Singapore, like Ireland, like Basque Country, Israel, where you just wonder if somebody there has believed it. It may not be true, but they may have believed it and thought that this may be the way that you get people less resistant to. But no. But this isn't helpful to us. I mean, the key thing is we have the science. They are on the ropes from a scientific point of view. They will gladly clutch at straws if we can all appear as conspiracy nutcases. But it's a good question. It's a good question. But I say forget it.
Lady,
I just wanted to know, is there any way from our tap, when we get water out of our tap, that we can remove the fluoride ourselves, like boiling water?
No, boiling makes it worse. If you boil water, you get rid of the chlorine, which is added to kill bacteria. The excess chlorine gas will come off. When you boil fluoridated water, only steam comes off, and the fluoride is left. And the water gets more concentrated in fluoride. So that's no good. You can use things like reverse osmosis and other filters and so on. But please remember, if you're drinking a lot of that water, and some kids now drinking enormous quantities of, the Pepsi Cola, Coca-Cola, Dasani, and so on, they're not getting the minerals in that water. So I'm sorry to the company here. I personally would like to use spring water. If I've got to buy water, I think I'd buy spring water, not reverse osmosis. And this came out quite graphically for us, because we live in a fluoridated community. It took us 7.5 years to get it out of Canton, New York, and then we moved south, 4 hours south to Binghamton, New York. My eldest son lives in having babies, so we got to see the grandbaby. So now we live in Binghamton, so we are drinking fluoridated water. So we started using reverse osmosis. And then the next thing that happens, my wife is complaining of pains in the joints. And she doesn't have any idea what's causing this. And then she put two and two together and said, maybe I'm not getting the minerals that I should be getting. Now, if you do use reverse osmosis, and this company, if they're listening, I hope I'm ruining your bottom line and your thing, may I strongly suggest that with the water, you sell little packets of nutrients, a certain amount of nutrients, either in liquid form or solid form, that people add to that, so that they're getting the calcium and the magnesium and so on. So this is a suggestion that when you're selling your reverse osmosis, you're going to be removing the minerals that we need, calcium and magnesium. So as a strategy, can you sell little packets of those minerals with the water equipment? You do? But the problem with protecting yourself is it's no darn good when you go downtown. Every glass cup of coffee, every glass of water, every meal that you eat downtown is going to have fluoride. So you can protect yourself up to a certain point, but it's not complete. Yeah.
We've got time for two more. So lady at the back and then the gentleman here.
About what year was the fluoridation introduced?
1966 was the legislation and 1968 was when it was first brought into WA. Currently about 93% of West Australians receive it. Small communities around the place like Margaret River hasn't got it yet, Yanchep hasn't got it, Port Hedland hasn't got it.
I was just interested in terms of when the immunisation schedules increased about 50s, polio and whatnot, and the introduction of thimerosal, which is mercury within the immunisations, whether that has an effect on IQ as well, if they, if it came at the same time as to where those levels came down, so which what was immunisation. Thimerosal was mercury, which is still in some of the immunisations these days, not all. They've tried to eradicate that, but that mercury is a very damaging neurotoxin.
Well, speaking from Western Australia, as far as I'm aware, there's no studies have been made into that.
Thank you. I watched a video for somebody in Holland. Sorry, my Italian, but
Yeah.
so this is an old doctor, a GP.
Yeah, Hans Mullenberg.
So you know the story,
Yeah.
and he said very clearly, people are getting, after a while, they get used to the fluoride absorption.
Yeah.
So your body, your brain is not doing bothering you any longer.
Yeah.
I think it was a very, very good thing to
Yes.
know. The people had,
Yeah, so you know who we're talking about. Hans Mullenberg, who's still alive, he gave advice to the Minister of Health in Israel before she banned fluoridation. But he had an unusual situation where half of his practice was in unfluoridated part, I've forgotten the name of it, what it was, as part of Amsterdam. The rest was fluoridated, so two parts. And he knew Warburg's work, who was an allergist who studied fluoride's effect. And so when patients came in, and they had a whole list of symptoms, when they described these symptoms, he said to the patients, right, stop drinking. Is your water fluoridated? Do you have fluoride here? If it was yes, he says, stop drinking. And then when they came back, if the symptoms had cleared up, he checked them off. Then this was caused by fluoridation. And if it didn't clear up, then it was caused by something else. And from this experience, he worked out between 1% and 4% of the population is sensitive to fluoride. And the thing which I thought was really interesting is babies, colic. You know, when babies, they scream their heads off when they're being fed sometimes. Is it because they're getting a fluoridated water and their stomach lining just can't take it, so they vomit? I don't know, colic. So, very irritable, they cry all the time. Be worth checking if you have relatives who have babies that cry their heads off, especially when they get fed, to see what happens if you use non-fluoridated water to make up their meals, whatever it is. Yeah, the wonderful guy, Hans Mullenberg, and he wrote a book called The Freedom Fight, how they ended fluoridation in Holland, in the Netherlands, and passed a government decree to that effect. And one of the things which happened, and this is something you might work on, one of the things that happened before the ban took place is they laid on separate water lines in communities where it was a hot issue. So they said, right, if you want non-fluoridated water, there's a tap in town. You can go line up and get your non-fluoridated water. They've just done it in Hastings, New Zealand. They put on a line to drink for non-fluoridated water. So that, whilst you're trying to get the ultimate, the end of fluoridation, you can make these little advances. I mean, and also I should point out, if you go to Wellington, New Zealand, there's an area there in Wellington, New Zealand, where they have an artesian well in the town, and you can take your buckets and containers and tanks and get it filled with this lovely artesian water. People come from all over Wellington. They line up there to get this water. So that is another thing, a warning on the water bills. This is something we're doing in the United States. We're getting water departments through legislation to be forced to put a warning on the water bills. And sometimes the annual water bill, and it just says to, if you bottle feed your children, babies, then use non-fluoridated water, not tap water. Just a warning. So that's another good one.
In Perth was some fountain in Kings Park between natural and mineral water. The authority is shut down because too many people going.
Oh wow!
So before we do the draw, I'm just going to give you 3 examples of why I do this. And this is a time-consuming job. I get paid for it. I get a lot of abuse for it in the media. The Department of Health and Minister of Health calls me an extremist. I'm a crazy person. I'm a conspiracy theorist. I'm going to give you 3 examples of why I do this from very, very recently. The first was through a series of endless questioning, we finally got an admission from the Department of Health on the source of the fluoride, particularly how much is used. Now the source of the fluoride here in Perth is from CSBP in Connett, nice big industrial unit, and they make phosphate fertilisers down there. The fluoride that goes in your water is the waste product from making that phosphate fertiliser, and they basically spray it out with high pressure hoses. It goes into a slurry. It's hexafluorosilicic acid, and I probably pronounced that wrong, I do apologise. And that goes into your drinking water at 1 part per million. 1,300 tonnes a year of that industrial waste gets put in your drinking water every single year at your expense, financially and health. As industrial waste, they could not put it in the sea because it's in breach of international law. They could not dump it in the environment because it's in breach of environmental law, but they dilute it through your. That's fine. 1,300 tonnes. That's number 1. Number 2, the media. We did a deal with the Sunday Times of Perth Now about a month ago to give them exclusive access to Paul while he was here in Perth, to help promote this event obviously, but also to create a bit of debate here in Perth. Paul wrote an opinion piece editorial that was going to go in today's Sunday Times alongside an opinion piece from somebody from the Department of Health to give the opposite opinion. We're happy with that. We got a call on Friday to say the editor had decided it was not newsworthy. Nobody's interested in water fluoridation. It doesn't affect anybody apparently. Much rather hear about puppets and things like that than football players. So it got pulled. We wasted all that time getting an excuse about access, and we got absolutely screwed over. Which is why Paul says we can't rely, unfortunately, on the media to get this out. The final thing is this. Many of you have kindly signed a petition. These are all the petitions, filled out petitions we've collected over the last 2 years. And I thank you, every single one of you, for doing so. The purpose of submit this was to hand to the Upper House of Parliament up in West Perth with the request that they conduct an independent review into water fluoridation, because the current review process, whereby you have a bunch of bureaucrats who advise the Minister of Health, who aren't going to turkeys about for Christmas and make themselves out of a job, telling me it's safe and effective all the time. So we sent this in, and the Right Honourable, or not Right Honourable, the Honourable Simon O'Brien MLC chairman of that particular committee, wrote me a nice letter, and he said, and I paraphrase, "While I wrote to the Minister of Health to ask him about this, he said you're mad, and so I'm ignoring all your signatures." Unbelievable. How many thousands of signatures have we got here already? Well, you know what? I'm not giving up. I'm not going to stop. Yes, that's a setback, and I'm used to setbacks in this, because as Paul has demonstrated, we're fighting against an entrenched system. But we will win. It is very easy to end water fluoridation. They literally just stop putting the crap in the water. It's that easy. And it's happening around the world. And I do not want Western Australia to be the last place on earth to give this up. The rest of the world thinks we're all mad, for goodness sake. And maybe we are. Maybe we've just drunk too much water. So what I urge you today is this. Please do not go away from today. If you believe what you've heard today, do not go away and do nothing. Please do something about it. Whether it be just follow us on Facebook, whether it be buy a copy of the book here at the front, or buy some of our merchandise out in the front, or sign the petition, or better still, please join us. There's a handful of us who are fighting this fight, but with numbers we can make a big, big difference. It's an uphill struggle, and many hands make light work. So I urge you, please, if you have any spare capacity, please come and see one of the team. They're wearing the fluoride-free t-shirts. Please come and see one of the team. We really would value your help. But I say, if nothing else, please just mention it, talk to people, get the debate going, because we're fighting a deafening silence in the media, so we're fighting an uphill struggle, but through word of mouth we will win, just as they won in Israel, just as they won in Calgary, just as they won through numerous campaigns across Queensland, councils in Queensland. It will happen here, and with your help, it'll happen much sooner. So thank you very much for coming along today. Ask Paul if we could draw a raffle ticket for win the book.
Oh, come on. Other way up. Purple. It's a purple ticket. Purple, people do this. A30. A30.
I think we have a winner at the back. Okay, so if you'd all like to put your hands together to Paul, it's going to be here. Here for the next 2 days, spent Parliament on Tuesday. We are going to win this, so thank you again for all coming along. Thank you.